Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threat to international peace and security, conflict-related food insecurity. The agenda is adopted. Before each of you is a list of speakers who have requested to participate in accordance with Rule 37 and 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure. We propose that they be invited to participate in this meeting. There being no objection, it is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2025/688, a letter dated 28 October 2025 from the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone to the United Nations, addressed to the Secretary General. I warmly welcome the Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency Ms. Amina J. Mohammed, and give her the floor.
Thank you. His Excellency Julius Maada, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, distinguished members of the Security Council, Excellency, colleagues, thank you for convening this debate. I commend the Republic of Sierra Leone for placing conflict-related food insecurity squarely where it belongs, at the center of this Council's agenda. Sierra Leone brings profound understanding to this debate. When you have lived through conflict's devastation, you know with absolute clarity that war destroys more than infrastructure. It destroys the ability to feed your children and your communities. Excellencies, war and hunger are often two faces of the same crises. They are a lived reality for hundreds of millions trapped in conflict zones, which bears this out with brutal clarity. Bullets and bombs obliterate the fields where food grows, the markets where people trade, the roads that connect farmers to families. And hunger strikes back with equal force. Empty bellies fuel desperation. Desperation fuels displacement and violence, and the result is instability and often the destruction of the very systems that produce food. This Council's mandate is maintenance of international peace and security, and there can be neither peace where people are starving nor security where hunger drives conflict. The evidence is irrefutable. Armed conflict drives acute food security in 14 of the 16 hunger hotspots worldwide. Last year, 295 million people faced acute hunger, 14 million more than the year before. The number of people experiencing catastrophic hunger have more than doubled to 1.9 million. In Sudan, the world's largest hunger crisis, violence is perpetuating famine across Darfur and Kordofan. In Gaza, where famine was confirmed in August, the situation remains severe. Across Haiti, Yemen, and the Sahel, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, millions remain trapped in a vicious cycle of hunger and conflict. Borders offer no protection from these consequences. We live in an interconnected world where conflict in one region sends shockwaves across continents. The war in Europe disrupted grain exports that triggered food crises across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Markets panicked, inflation soared, and millions went hungry. As we saw in this instance once and again, the poorest pay the ultimate price. This is the new arithmetic of conflict. When food systems are attacked, weaponized, the impact is global. Food itself has become a weapon through deliberate starvation tactics, which we are seeing all too often, including recently in Gaza. but also through the systematic destruction of agricultural systems, through blockades that strangle supply, through the calculated disruption of trade flows that leaves entire regions vulnerable. The mechanics are devastating and a violation of international humanitarian law. Arms are looted and wells are poisoned. Grain stores are burned and processing facilities destroyed. Roads that connect farmers to markets are blocked. Nomadic communities disrupted as livestock is rustled and often destroyed. The infrastructure that makes food systems work is targeted. And in a spiral of death, we continue to invest in military expenditure rather than putting an end to hunger. The world's total military expenditure over the past decade estimated at $21.9 trillion a year. Then there is climate change, accelerating this crisis with deadly force. Floods wash away harvests, droughts turn fields into dust, and rising temperatures devastate grazing lands. The predictable seasons farmers relied on for millennia are also disrupted. Many of the countries most vulnerable to climate stand in the shadow of conflict, and this is not a coincidence. I saw this firsthand as Nigeria's Minister of Environment. When Lake Chad began drying up, what we faced was never just an ecological or economic crisis. It was one of governance and security that helped give rise to Boko Haram. When population growth and urban sprawl intensified tensions between farmers and herders over shrinking resources, the issue was never simply about water access. It was about food systems under stress and communities pushed to breaking point. When I meet girls walking each day to fetch water, missing school in the process, it became clear to me that the challenge went far beyond resources. It touched gender inequality, education, and the future of entire communities, putting the entire Agenda 2030 at risk. Excellencies, we cannot and must not accept these examples as the new normal. The hunger conflict nexus is a strategic and existential threat, and this Council must treat it as such. We need 4 actions. First, humanitarian access must flow, ceasefires must hold, and international humanitarian law must be upheld. The obstruction, delays, and excuses that have characterized too many conflicts must end. We see the consequences in Sudan and in Gaza, where humanitarian access remains severely restricted, even as famine takes hold. Food systems that should sustain civilian populations have become battlegrounds. Humanitarian workers must reach people in need, and food systems must be protected as the civilian infrastructure they represent, farms, markets, transport routes, and storage facilities that serve as lifelines rather than legitimate targets. Resolutions 2417 and 2573, which this body adopted in 2018 and 2021 respectively, give us the framework by condemning starvation as a method of warfare, demanding protection of civilians, and requiring unimpeded humanitarian access. Years later, crises are more devastating than ever. What we need is enforcement. That means broadening engagement beyond governments to include civil society organizations that witness conditions on the ground, regional actors who understand local dynamics, and national partners who possess the leverage the international community often lacks. We must work with all of them to drive implementation and demand accountability for violations. Ceasefires and humanitarian pauses serve as strategic necessities for protecting the food systems people depend on. When parties facilitate access, instead of weaponizing denial, they create space for recovery, for peace, and pathways to sustainability. Second, the path from fragility to resilience runs through sustainable food systems. Building them requires a fundamental shift from short-term relief to long-term transformation, and from emergency response to strategic investments, as I recently reinforced in the call to action coming out of the UN food system stocktake in Ethiopia. Achieving the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals demands this transformation, and we cannot end hunger, build resilient communities, or secure peace without it. While hunger fuels violence and displacement, resilient systems can break that cycle. When smallholder farmers thrive, local economies grow. When food systems connect to health, education, and social protection, they do become a foundation for stability. This means strengthening local markets so communities can access affordable, nutritious food, building storage facilities that protect harvests, processing infrastructure that adds value, ensuring that women and young people have ownership and decision-making power over the systems that feed their families and communities. The African Union's CAADP framework, renewed just this year through the Kampala Declaration, demonstrates this commitment in action, with African countries pledging to increase agri-food by 45% and triple intra-Africa trade while building climate resilience. Leads me to my third point. Climate action stands as an essential pillar of both food security and peace. As the Secretary-General told world leaders at COP30, keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees is slipping from our grasp. Even a brief overshoot risks pushing natural systems past the point of no return, exposing billions to worsening hunger while intensifying the very threats to peace and security that this Council is charged with preventing. Ensuring early warning systems reach every person is also non-negotiable. We must deliver adaptation finance at scale so communities can manage resources, build resilience, and prevent climate stress from igniting conflict. When farmers have drought-resistant seeds and water management systems, when communities have the tools to adapt, they can weather shocks instead of breaking under them. Investing in climate adaptation today prevents hunger tomorrow. Fourth, peace is the only sustainable solution. Humanitarian action saves lives today, but it cannot end war. Only political solutions can do that. Achieving lasting peace requires treating food, agriculture, and humanitarian access as strategic imperatives. That means governments, donors, and implementers working with humanitarian development, peace nexus to tackle root causes of conflict, not just their symptoms. Prevention demands early investment. If we wait for famine declarations to mobilize resources, we have already failed. People have already died, and early action saves lives, protects livelihoods, and costs far less than the crisis response. But prevention also requires addressing exclusion, inequality, and the systemic absence of state services that create conditions for conflict. When governments cannot deliver basic services, when marginalization deepens, when people lose hope, grievances multiply, and food insecurity becomes one more accelerant on the fire. This is where the nexus approach becomes essential. Thank you. We cannot address food security without addressing the root causes of conflict. We cannot build peace without ensuring people can feed themselves. And we cannot achieve sustainable development without tackling both at the same time. Excellencies, as an old East African proverb teaches us, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Today, that grass, the innocent civilians around the world, Sudan, Gaza, Haiti, Yemen, and the Sahel, the DRC, so many other places, are suffering beyond measure. They're paying the price for conflicts they did not choose, or for decisions in which they have no voice. This Council has both the authority and the responsibility to act. Let us choose to build a future where food is never again used as a weapon, where no child goes hungry because of war, and where food systems become engines of peace, resilience, and hope, rather than casualties of a conflict. I thank you.
I thank the Deputy Secretary General for her briefing. And I'll give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Opportunity to speak on the critical issue of conflict-induced hunger. The evidence from the latest Hunger Hotspots report from the Global Network Against Food Crisis is clear. The world's most extreme food crisis, including the famines in parts of the Gaza Strip and Sudan, are driven primarily by armed conflict and violence. In South Sudan, the risk of famine persists in some counties affected by localized violence. The more intense the violence, the worse the food insecurity. Attacks harming civilians and civilian infrastructure leave fields abandoned, disrupt food supply chains, drive up prices, and destroy livelihoods. In Yemen, where 17 million people are going hungry and another 1 million are forecast, Two, damage to infrastructure has impeded imports. Ongoing conflict is displacing people and exacerbating economic decline, while extreme humanitarian access constraints and insecurity limit aid delivery in critical parts of the country. In Syria, agricultural production has been severely affected by damaged infrastructure, restricted access to farmland due to explosive ordnance, and high levels of displacement. Hunger is exposing people to greater risks of sexual exploitation and abuse and forced displacement as people struggle simply to feed themselves. Women are especially impacted, often going without to prioritize their families. In armed conflicts, international humanitarian law is clear. Civilians and civilian objects must be protected. The use of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited. So is attacking, destroying, removing, or rendering useless objects indispensable to civilian survival. Resolution 2417, adopted in 2018, reinforces these obligations. And in situations of violence in which the rules of war don't apply, international human rights law and minimum humanitarian standards play an equally vital role in preventing and addressing hunger. Humanitarian action is also essential to prevent and address hunger in conflict. When humanitarian access is denied, hunger and malnutrition rise, often with devastating consequences for civilians. Conflict parties must allow the rapid and unimpeded passage of impartial humanitarian relief and ensure humanitarians have the freedom of movement needed to carry out their work. Resolution 2417, as well as Resolution 2730, adopted last year, reiterate these duties. 1 month into the ceasefire in Gaza, the UN and our partners are seizing every opening to save lives. Millions of meals have been provided, nutrition sites have reopened, and some medical services have resumed, among other progress. But access is still restricted by limits at border crossings, delays to aid convoys, and bureaucratic impediments that slow the entry of vital supplies and, in some cases, staff. In Sudan, conflict has shattered food systems and displaced millions. According to the latest IPC analysis, more than 21 million people are facing high levels of acute food insecurity, the largest such crisis in the world. Yet many areas remain inaccessible to humanitarians. People trapped between front lines are cut off from assistance and enduring extreme hunger. The UN, including OCHA, works relentlessly to secure humanitarian access. We negotiate with parties to conflict, operate notification systems to inform armed actors about humanitarian movements, and coordinate responders on the ground. But these tools can only work if parties are committed to facilitate access and aid operations. The record number of attacks harming aid workers over the past 2 years and the knock-on effect on communities' access to relief is appalling. I call on states to condemn these attacks and push for consistent, credible investigations in every context. Reducing bureaucratic hurdles also facilitates access, simplifying entry procedures for humanitarian staff, speeding up permits for relief supplies, and enabling safe movement. Clearance of unexploded ordnance is another practical enabler, allowing aid to reach people safely and helping farmers return to their land, and humanitarian funding remains essential to sustain operations. Finally, without political will, even the best coordination, negotiation, and funding will fall short. Preventing and ending hunger is not simply a logistical or financial challenge. It demands sustained political engagement. I want to propose 4 areas of action for this Council and UN member states. First, use your leverage to address hunger in conflict. This means sustained political dialogue and diplomatic engagement and using tools at your disposal to influence parties. As part of that, making compliance with international law a condition for arms exports is essential. Second, adopt strong policies and practices to protect civilians. Alongside implementing their legal obligations, we encourage member states to join commitments such as the political declaration on strengthening the protection of civilians from the humanitarian consequences arising from the use of explosive weapons in populated areas and turning those commitments into real action. Third, facilitate humanitarian action by simplifying bureaucratic procedures and ensuring humanitarians can engage all parties. Implement Security Council Resolution 2730 on the protection of aid workers, including the practical steps outlined by the Secretary General. Fourth, strengthen accountability, demand and support investigations, adopt legislation to prosecute war crimes, enhance interstate cooperation, and where competent national authorities are unable or unwilling to act, support international jurisdictions. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Musuya for her briefing. And I'll give the floor to Mr. Maximo Torero.
Thank you very much, President. At outset, I wish to thank His Excellency, the President of Sierra Leone, for convening this timely and important open debate on conflict-related food insecurity, addressing food insecurity as a driver and a consequence of conflict, and for inviting the FAO to contribute to the discussion. Mr. President, around the world, nearly 673 million people still go to bed hungry. In Africa, 307 million men and women and children lack of sufficient food. In Asia, the number rises to 323 million, while in Latin America and Caribbean, 34 million face undernourishment. These are not abstract statistics. They represent children whose growth is stunted, families forced to leave their homes, and nations whose social fabric is under strain. More and more, hunger and instability go hand in hand. Food insecurity is no longer just a humanitarian challenge. It is a matter of global peace and security. When families cannot afford to eat, social contracts weaken. When farmers lose their crops to droughts or floods and conflicts or wars, local markets falter and tensions flare. When international food prices spike or price volatility becomes excessive, protesters erupt in cities from Port-au-Prince, Port-au-Prince to Cairo, and rigorous empirical research confirms this. Higher global food prices and excessive volatility are directly associated with more social unrest events, with effects strongest in poorer countries and in urban settings. For over 2 decades, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, together with its partners, has been at the forefront of global efforts to shape evidence-based responses to food insecurity, particularly in the world's more fragile and conflict-affected settings. It's in this context, and in the need to have neutral assessments and neutral data, that the Integrated Food Security Peace Classification, or IPC, was first developed by FAO in 2004 in Somalia. At the time, the need for a robust, consensus-driven, and actionable food security measurement tool was clear. Humanitarian actors require reliable information to guide effective response in a complex and volatile environment. What began as a country-specific tool has since evolved into a global standard, serving as a common currency for food security and nutrition analysis in emergency contexts. The IPC now provides comparable findings in over 30 countries, many of which are facing the world's most severe food crises, such as Gaza, South Sudan, Sudan, and Yemen. When combined with the Cadre Harmonisé, a similar analytical framework used in 17 countries across West Africa and the Sahel, their combined coverage extends to nearly 50 countries globally. Designed to generate actionable knowledge in difficult contexts, these tools collectively inform over $6 billion in humanitarian assistance each year, guiding strategic decisions and resource allocation in some of the most complex and high-risk environments. Today, the IPC Global Initiative, hosted by FAO, brings together 21 international and intergovernmental institutions, including UN agencies, regional organizations, and NGOs. These partners work collectively to ensure the technical quality, neutrality, and comparability of food security and nutrition analysis in the emergency context in which they are applied. How does this work? Based on careful analysis of all variable information, the IPC framework assigns geographic areas into one of 5 phases of acute food insecurity and of acute malnutrition, based on the most severe conditions faced by at least 20% of the population. Phase 1 corresponds to minimal or no food insecurity, while Phase 5, famine, is the most extreme category, indicating catastrophic conditions marked by starvation, destitution, extreme levels of acute malnutrition, and elevated mortality. IPC is now the primary mechanisms the international community to determine whether famine is happening or projected to occur in a country. The IPC process ensures the highest quality and neutrality of food insecurity classifications through a rigorous standardized system built on cross-validation of multiple data sources and expert technical consensus. All evidence used must meet the strict IPC methodological criteria, and datasets are systematically triangulated, combining food security, nutrition, livelihoods, market, and climate indicators to confirm consistency and reliability. A multi-agency team of government specialists, FAO, WFP, UNICEF, NGOs, and independent experts jointly review and validate the evidence, ensuring that the classifications reflect a convergence of robust, independently verified information. Finally, regional and global IPC quality assurance teams conduct an additional layer of review before results are released, guaranteeing that every classification is grounded in sound, cross-checked data and expert validation. When an IPC analysis in a country indicates a situation of famine, an ad hoc dedicated procedure is triggered to rigorously assess the plausibility of the conclusion. At this stage, the Famine Review Committee, or the FRC, is convened. This is a group of highly respected independent experts in food security, nutrition, and public health. The FRC role is to examine the available evidence, debate the findings, and ensure that analysis meets the highest standards of technical rigor, integrity, and neutrality. Only after this review is a famine classification confirmed and communicated. This process is essential to maintaining trust in IPC results, especially in politically sensitive environments. In the current context of escalating conflict and fragility and shrinking humanitarian funding that drives geographic and sectoral prioritization, the IPC is more critical than ever and must not only be supported but protected as a cornerstone of evidence-based decision-making. Just in the past year, the Famine Review Committee has confirmed famine on separate occasions, twice in Sudan, December 2024, November 2025, and once in Gaza, August 2025. This marks the first time that famine driven by conflict has been confirmed more than once in a single year. When famine is confirmed, the IPC provides critical evidence that decision makers need to act. Along its findings, the Famine Review Committee issues a set of targeted recommendations addressed to key stakeholders. These include recommended action for senior decision makers and resource partners, which must be considered to swift implementation through existing humanitarian and diplomatic mechanisms. But we can all agree waiting for a famine to happen to make a decisive action is far too late. In both Sudan and Gaza, the IPC had already issued early warning signals, calling for immediate actions to prevent the worst outcomes. These warnings were delivered in 2 ways. First, by projecting or forecasting famine within a defined future period based on most likely scenario, and second, by issuing risk famine statements grounded in alternative worst-case scenarios. These warnings offer us a critical window of opportunity, first for humanitarian diplomacy, for secure access to affected populations, and second, to respond to critical needs before conditions deterioration further. The IPC is not just a technical tool, it is a lifeline for the millions of people living in the front lines of conflict and hunger. It provides the international community with the clarity and credibility needed to act decisively, especially in the most complex environments. The recent confirmations of famine are stark reminders that conflict continues to drive food insecurity and malnutrition to catastrophic levels. The lesson is clear. Where there is hunger, there will be unrest. Where there is resilience, there can be peace. Global leaders must treat food security as a peace dividend and not afterthought. If we are serious about preventing conflict, we must be serious about ensuring that every person in every country has access to affordable, nutritious, and healthy food. Food insecurity not only is a moral imperative, it is the most practical path to peace. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Torero for his briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki.
Your Excellency Julius Maada, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, distinguished members of the Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am grateful for the opportunity to brief the Council on the escalating food and nutrition crisis across Africa. But I would like to start by mentioning the fact that Sierra Leone is one of the best examples that we have of food systems transformation on the continent. My intervention will address three critical dimensions: the overall scale of the crisis, its most acute manifestations in Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the Sahel, and the urgent measures required to prevent a deeper humanitarian and security emergency. Africa has become the epicenter of global hunger, with 20.4% of its population food insecure, twice the global average. By 2030, over half of the world's hungry will reside on the continent. The global report on food crisis cites 295 million acutely food insecure people across 53 countries, nearly half driven by conflict. This marks the 6th year of rising hunger fueled by conflict, climate shocks, economic fragility, and systemic vulnerabilities. Sudan faces one of Africa's gravest food emergencies. 25.6 million people, 54% of the population, are acutely food insecure. Over 8 million are in phase 4 emergency, and 800,000 are in phase 5 famine, marking Sudan's first confirmed famine. The crisis is driving mass displacement into Chad, South Sudan, and the Horn of Africa. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 25.6 million people were acutely food insecure in 2024, with conditions worsening. Violence in the east has destroyed farms and displaced millions. The crisis costs an estimated $8 billion annually in lost productivity and weakened human capital, threatening stability across the Great Lakes. The Sahel is experiencing its worst food crisis on record. Nigeria now has 31.8 million acutely food insecure people, with 6.9 million newly affected. Chad's caseload rose 47% due to conflict, floods, and inflation. Chronic malnutrition costs Sahelian economies between 2 and 3% of GDP annually, eroding state capacity and reinforcing fragility. Climate and economic shocks are deepening the crisis. Africa has lost 34% of agricultural productivity since 1961 and suffers 35% of global death from extreme weather, yet only 40% of Africans have access to early warning systems. Meanwhile, humanitarian funding is falling. Food sector support dropped 30% in 2023, with further cuts in 2024. Mr. President, the link between conflict and hunger in Africa is profound and mutually reinforcing. I respectfully offer three overarching priorities for the Council's consideration. First, food systems must be protected as essential civilian infrastructure under international humanitarian law. Agricultural land, water sources, markets, and storage facilities must be safeguarded. At the same time, humanitarian access must be guaranteed. Localized ceasefires during planting and harvest seasons, along with the expansion of protected humanitarian corridors, are critical to sustaining food production and averting famine. Second, early warning and conflict prevention systems must integrate food security indicators, particularly those from the integrated food security phase classification and regional tools to enable timely diplomatic engagement and targeted response. Emergency assistance must also be paired with long-term investment in resilient agri-food systems, with a focus on empowering women and youth who are central to African food production. Third, international financing must align with Africa's strategic vision, the Kampala Declaration, endorsed by all African Union member states, which commits to increasing agri-food output by 45%, tripling intra-African trade, reducing malnutrition by 25%, and ensuring that 60% of Africans can afford a healthy diet and halving extreme poverty by 2035. These ambitions require peace, partnership, and sustained global commitment. Mr. President, the cost of hunger in Africa is not only counted in numbers, it is felt in broken lives, uprooted communities, and lost futures. Malnutrition alone drains over $25 billion annually from African economies. Without urgent actions, millions more will face catastrophic hunger and entire regions risk irreversible decline. Africa has the vision and resolve to transform its food systems, but peace and global solidarity are essential. Without peace, Africa cannot feed itself, and without food security, peace cannot be sustained. I thank you, and thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Dr. Mayaki for his briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. Madam Deputy Secretary General, distinguished members of the Security Council, I'm pleased to return to this historic chamber for the second time in 2 years during Sierra Leone's tenure on the Council to address an issue that tests our shared humanity and global stability, conflict-related insecurity, food insecurity. Last year, we discussed reforming this council to make it more representative. Today, we discuss how to make it more responsive, because even a reformed council without moral standing will not preserve peace. Sierra Leone's own history has taught us that peace is not inherited. It is cultivated, season by season, through peaceful settlement of dispute, justice, and equality. And today, as we gather under this roof of our multilateral collective security scheme, we must remember that hunger, too, is a form of violence. Slow, silent, and corrosive. I thank Her Excellency the Deputy Secretary General, Madam Amina Mohammed, Assistant Secretary General Joyce Musuya, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki, and Mr. Maximo Torero Cullen for their thoughtful briefings and for the leadership they continue to provide in addressing global food systems and humanitarian coordination. Distinguished members of the Security Council, the Charter of the United Nations begins with a promise to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. That mandate extends beyond ending wars to preventing the conditions that make wars inevitable. As a former UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld warned us, our task is, and I quote, to save humanity from hell. In our century, that hell is not only found in the battlefields, it is found in the empty bowl, the barren field, and the malnourished child. Conflict situations around the world and the images that fill our screens and newspapers must convict us out of global complicity. Emaciated infants clinging to life, mothers whose bodies can no longer produce milk, fathers unable to provide a single meal for their families, and children who brave siege and bombardment in search of food, only to lose their lives to unexploded ordnance, are not distant tragedies. They are moral failures of our collective humanity. From Gaza to Sahel, from Sudan to Ukraine, and in parts of Haiti, hunger has been weaponized. A silent siege that kills long after the guns fall silent. It corrodes a social cohesion, fuels displacement, and when combined with exclusion and despair, can ignite instability. In Africa, the world's youngest region, where over 60% of the population is under 25, rising expectations without opportunity or nourishment can quickly turn hope into unrest. This is why Sierra Leone has called for this debate, to affirm that food security is peace security, not a secondary humanitarian issue. Distinguished members of the Security Council, I wish to highlight 3 main points. My first point, starvation is not collateral damage. It is a crime. International law prohibits the starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. Resolution 2417 condemns its use. Resolution 2573 demands the protection of agricultural land, water, and energy infrastructure indispensable to civilian survival. The Geneva Convention and the Rome Statute classify deliberate starvation as a war crime. The framework exists. What is lacking is compliance and enforcement. This Council must ensure unimpeded humanitarian access, predictable deconfliction mechanisms, and the removal of blockades and bureaucratic impediments that turn hunger into a weapon. Early warning systems must track conflict disruption, production, storage, market, and transport so that early warning leads to early action. The Black Sea Grain Initiative demonstrated that dialogue, even amid conflict, can sustain vital supply lines. Above all, there must be accountability. When civilians are deliberately starved, perpetrators, state or non-state, must face consequences. No ambition can justify starving a child or destroying a harvest. The law forbids it. Our conscience forbids it too. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my second point is that food insecurity must be viewed through the lens of a driver of conflict, as well as a peace-building imperative. Conflict destroys food systems. Faiths are mined or burned, livestock stolen or lost, roads and ports are blocked, markets are shuttered, prices spike beyond reach, while hunger deepens grievance and fuels renewed violence. This cruel cycle is evident in Sudan, the Sahel, Eastern DRC, Gaza, Yemen, and Haiti, where food insecurity has reached catastrophic levels. There can be no sustainable peace on an empty stomach. Food insecurity must therefore be integral to peace building, not an afterthought. Peace agreements must protect food systems and guarantee humanitarian access. Post-conflict recovery must restore livelihoods through seeds, tools, feeder routes, and access to markets. Women and youth must be central to this transformation as producers, traders, and innovators, because when families can plant, harvest, and sell in peace, reconciliation becomes real and durable. Distinguished members of the Security Council, my third point, which relates to peace and development nexus, and as President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, I bring to this agenda our own national experience. Our Feed Salon initiative, as both a local model and a regional contribution to the global pursuit of peace through food security. Sierra Leone's experience teaches that peace must be fed, literally and figuratively, every season. Our flagship national development initiative, Feed Salon, places food security at the heart of national development. It aims to raise productivity, reduce import dependence, create rural jobs, and build climate resilience. The program stands on 4 pillars. First is production, which involves access to seeds, mechanization, irrigation, and research. The second pillar is resilience, focusing on climate-smart practices and land restoration. The third pillar is market and value chains, involving rural infrastructure, processing, and finance. The fourth pillar is human capital, which involves empowering women and youth, improving nutrition, and linking protection to productivity. Our goal is not merely to grow food, but to grow peace, putting livelihoods into people's hands, dignity in their homes, and hope in their communities. Sierra Leone is also advancing regional cooperation on early warning, strategic reserves, and trade facilitation so that grain can move when people need it, where people need it most. As chair of ECOWAS, Authority of Heads of State and Government, Sierra Leone's voice carries the shared aspiration of a region determined to transform its challenges into opportunities. From the Sahel to the Atlantic, ECOWAS member states are integrating food security into peace building, climate adaptation, and trade frameworks. The ECOWAS Regional Food Security Reserve and our early warning and response network are being expanded to anticipate crises, coordinate humanitarian corridors, and stabilize markets. These efforts are part of a continental commitment under the African Union Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program and the Malabo Declaration on Agricultural Transformation. We commend the United Nations agencies, international financial institutions, and private sector partners whose innovation and investment continue to sustain millions. Together, we must now move from fragmented responses to a coordinated global food security compact. Excellencies, intentions must now become implementation. I propose 6 concrete actions as part of a solution-driven approach. Protect food systems in conflict. Integrate protection of civilian food assets, such as fields, herds, storage facilities, maize, and sources of water and energy for agriculture into council mandates and sanction regimes. Have standard language in council documents, mandates, and sanction criteria. The council must also ensure the implementation and compliance with its resolution, including 2417. Institutionalize early warning. This requires regular, integrated UN reporting on the impact of conflict on food systems and humanitarian access, enabling the Council to act before famine occurs. 3, safeguard access and deconfliction mechanisms. Condemn and sanction the obstruction of humanitarian relief, as well as the diversion and deliberate withholding of food aid as a tactic of war. Support predictable, needs-based humanitarian corridors and ensure deconfliction. 4, advance accountability. Promote impartial investigations into starvation crimes. Support the integration of starvation prohibition into domestic law. And when appropriate, allow accountability measures to proceed. 5, link peace-building finance to food security. Ensure that peace-building strategies and financing instruments prioritize livelihoods, rural infrastructure, and climate-smart agriculture as essential peace dividends rather than optional extras. 6, and lastly, promote women and youth empowerment by supporting programs that finance land tenure, access to finance, skills training, and market opportunities for young agricultural entrepreneurs, transforming potential conflict into foundations of stability. Excellencies, starvation is never a natural outcome of conflict. It is a choice to break the law and betray our shared humanity. This Council has the duty to deter that choice and to hold violators to account. Sierra Leone's voice in this Council is that of a nation that has journeyed from fragility to stability, and of a region that continues to choose dialogue over division. As President of Sierra Leone, I've witnessed the power of principled engagement, even in difficult times. We may not always have the same interest, but we must always defend the same humanity that we all share. Africa is not here to be pitied for its challenges, but to be partnered for its solutions. Our continent holds 60% of the world's arable land, the youngest population, and the greatest potential for innovation in sustainable agriculture. What we need is not sympathy, but solidarity to unlock Africa's power to feed itself and to help feed the world. Preventing tomorrow's war requires treating food security as central to peace and security, not peripheral to it. Sierra Leone will continue to do its part through Feed Salon at home, through ECOWAS in our region, and through principled bridge-building leadership in this council. Let us reaffirm faith in the multilateral system as the only credible platform to prevent starvation, uphold international law, and preserve our shared humanity. Together, let us ensure that no child is starved into submission, no harvest held hostage, and no community driven to violence by hunger. If we align our laws with our conscience, our mandates with the needs of people, and our resources with the scale of the challenge, we will redeem the Charter's promise to succeeding generations. Let us plant the seeds of justice, water them with compassion, and guard them with courage so that peace may take root not only in our resolutions, but in the daily lives of those we serve. For peace is not a season. It is a covenant we must renew with every act of humanity. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Well, thank you to Sierra Leone for convening the Council today for this open debate, and it is especially an honor to have President Maada presiding today over the Council. Welcome, sir. Colleagues, the United States remains deeply alarmed by the rise in conflict-related food insecurity and, frankly, the very grim picture of severe food insecurity in many nations and many regions around the world. As we look around the world, we see over and over again oppressive regimes and their militaries, as well as terrorist groups and other non-state actors, destroying farms, destroying equipment, as well as blocking major trade routes and the humanitarian pipelines that are lifelines for hungry people. The result is increased food insecurity and increasingly amounts of people starving. This must be stopped, colleagues. We must hold those responsible accountable for their actions. And just looking around the world, for example, in the DRC, armed violence, particularly in the east, continues to displace families, continues to destroy fields, continues to disrupt trade. Millions remain food insecure as armed groups attack civilians, block humanitarian routes, and undermine the ability of communities to buy or cultivate their own food. In Sudan, the world's largest humanitarian crisis, starvation has become a weapon. Starvation has become rampant as the parties use food as a tactic of war. all parties, and I emphasize all parties to the conflict, must facilitate and allow rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access throughout Sudan. In Haiti, active humanitarian and life-saving assistance continues to support families and children impacted and terrorized by gang violence. The same type of humanitarian assistance are helping families that have been devastated recently by Hurricane Melissa, and all of those suffering from all forms of food insecurity. Programming focuses on Haiti's complex situation, providing life-saving assistance and rapid relief to communities, again, affected so horribly by gang violence and other forms of natural disasters. The United States has improved food security by supporting over 90,000 people with food, water, sanitation, shelter, and health services, hopefully paving the way for a better future for Haiti and for Haitians. In Gaza, President Trump's historic 20-point peace plan has already resulted in increased humanitarian aid to the people there. The United States will continue to work with the international community, with the UN, with so many nations represented here today, to deliver aid at scale to help those who need it the most. But just as an important statistic, in fiscal year 2025, the U.S. government provided over $400 million in life-saving humanitarian assistance inside the West Bank and Gaza, of which over $300 million was for life-saving food and nutrition assistance. President Trump's peace agreement has resulted in a dramatic increase in the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. An average now of over 660 trucks are entering Gaza daily since the ceasefire, and we will continue to work to deliver this aid at scale. The war in Ukraine has continued to exacerbate food insecurity globally, and it underscores the far-reaching and long-lasting consequences of war on people's basic needs and their basic ability to feed their family. Unfortunately, colleagues, these are just a handful of countries and regions that are facing this scourge. The United States has proven again and again to be the most generous nation in the world. The American people contribute over $500 billion in life-saving aid to charitable causes around the world, many of which help feed the hungry. The United States has long shouldered the financial burden of addressing this scourge, and we urge other donors to increase critically needed assistance. But ultimately, the Deputy Secretary General who joins us today is absolutely right. As she just said, only political solutions can lead to peace. Only political solutions can drive this scourge into the dustbin of history. And the United States will remain absolutely committed to driving these political solutions home so that we never again have to see these hungry families that we've all described and that we pity here today. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to express my appreciation to Your Excellency, President Pio, and for convening this important high-level open debate on the conflict-related food insecurity. I also want to express my gratitude to the Deputy Secretary General, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, ASG Ms. Misuya, and Dr. Mayaki, and Mr. Torero for their valuable contributions. Today's discussion underscores a complex but undeniable truth. While conflict and hunger are often interlinked, their relationship is not uniform. Armed conflicts remain one of the leading drivers of acute food insecurity, yet food insecurity itself can exacerbate fragility, deepen inequality, and undermine peace-building efforts. The Security Council's engagement, particularly through Resolution 2417 of 2018, has been instrumental in recognizing that hunger, when it's used as a weapon or allowed to persist, can pose a significant threat to international peace and security. Yet, as 2025 Global Report on Food Crisis notes, the number of people facing severe food insecurity continues to rise. This calls for a renewed global resolve anchored in prevention, protection, and partnership. Your Excellency, Mr. President, in Africa, we are witnessing a growing determination to address the structural causes of food insecurity through cooperation, innovation, and shared responsibility. The African Union's Kampala Declaration, under the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Programme, provides a transformative framework for strengthening agri-food system, enhancing productivity, and linking sustainable agriculture to peace and stability. Mr. President, this approach, rooted in African priorities, recognizes that food security is not only about feeding people, but about empowering communities, building inclusive economies, and fostering resilience. Similarly, the African Common Position on Humanitarian Effectiveness demonstrates the value of regional solidarity and local ownership in addressing the root causes of vulnerability. These frameworks remind us that investing in resilience is investment in peace. They also affirm that sustainable food system can serve as a bridge between development, peace building, and helping societies transition from dependency to self-reliance. When communities are empowered, institutions are strengthened, and international support aligns with local priorities, progress is possible. This means listening to women's concern and needs, building upon their resilience, knowledge, and critical role as both producers and caretakers. Mr. President, to move from recognition to action, my delegation would like to highlight several priorities. First, strengthening early warning and accountability mechanism as outlined in Resolution 2417. The Council should ensure that emerging risks are met with timely, coordinated response, and that those who weaponize hunger face appropriate consequence under international law. Second, deepen partnership that integrate humanitarian development and peace-building efforts. Sustainable food system must be central to conflict prevention and post-conflict recovery strategies, ensuring that communities can withstand future shocks. Third, we must center women at every stage of food security solutions and stronger gender lens in policy. This can be achieved through working consistently with sex disaggregated data and supporting alternative livelihood strategies for women in agriculture and beyond. We must contribute to elevating women's voices, resilience, knowledge, leadership at all levels. Genuine, lasting change requires recognizing women as the critical drivers of food system sustainability and resilience. Fourth, mobilize predictable and innovative financing that not only supports nationally owned, but also prioritize the transfer of practical knowledge, especially for improving natural resource management and tackling barriers created by unfair trade practices. Investment in rural infrastructure, market access, and local production capacity can yield lasting dividends in peace. To conclude, Mr. President, addressing conflict-related food insecurity is not only a necessity, but a strategic investment in peace and stability. Food must never be used as a weapon, nor should hunger be allowed to deepen division or perpetuate fragility. We reaffirm our collective commitment to transforming food insecurity from source of instability into catalyst for resilience and sustainable development. Our delegation will continue to strengthen partnership and invest in sustainable development to build a future where every person has the right to food, opportunity, and hope. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Excellency Dr. Julius Maada, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and welcome once again to the Council. Guyana commends Sierra Leone for its efficient stewardship of the Security Council this month, and your decision to convene an open debate on a subject of critical importance to global peace and security, conflict-related food insecurity. Thank you, Mr. President, for sharing Sierra Leone's experience, from which there is much we can learn. We thank Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed for her sobering statement and ASG Joyce Msuya for the comprehensive briefing. We also express our appreciation to the AU Special Envoy, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki, and FAO's Chief Economist, Mr. Maximo Torero Collin, for their valuable insights. Mr. President, armed conflict and violence remain the primary drivers of acute food insecurity in 14 hotspots of highest concern, according to the FAO WFP Hunger Hotspot report released last Monday. We have just heard from Mr. Torero that nearly 140 million people were affected by conflict-induced hunger in 2024, almost double the number in 2018. We are seeing record levels of hunger around the globe, with famine confirmed in Gaza and Sudan, and the risk of famine in South Sudan. Together with Mali and Haiti, these countries are the 5 highest hunger hotspots of concern. These are the worst situations, not the totality, all man-made and all in protracted conflict contexts. The undeniable reality is that armed conflict and violence drive acute food insecurity in multiple reinforcing ways. Conflict disrupts food production and supply chains, often destroying agriculture infrastructure and displacing communities from their land. These disruptions not only reduce the availability of food, but also significantly limit access for the most vulnerable populations, compounding existing hardship and perpetuating cycles of hunger. We see this in the breakdown of social services, in the destruction of civilian infrastructure, the collapse of food systems, starvation, and displacement, creating a cycle of need across generations, and worse, when exacerbated by climate change and economic shocks. Mr. President, as an elected member of the Council, Guyana has prioritized food insecurity in conflict settings. Building on the efforts of those before us on the Council, we held a debate on the nexus between climate change, food insecurity, and conflict during our presidency last year, and produced a report with Adelphi on the topic, which was launched at the Berlin Climate Conference. In our capacity as co-focal points on conflict and hunger in the Security Council, Guyana worked with Switzerland last year and Slovenia this year to raise awareness, propose Council action, and emphasize the need to implement international humanitarian law to prevent conflict-induced starvation and implement Resolution 2417. We also continue this advocacy as part of the Group of Friends on Action Against Conflict and Hunger. As a result of our work, we have identified several distinct areas where significant gaps persist between early warning mechanisms and decisive action to address conflict-related food insecurity. I will underscore 3 points that are critical to closing these gaps and strengthening our collective response. First, the importance of advocacy, political cooperation, and coordinated action. Advocacy is required to maintain global priority and collective political will for the full implementation of Resolution 2417, which condemns starvation as a method of warfare, and Resolution 2573, condemning the destruction of civilian infrastructure critical to survival. Global cooperation is also required to address funding gaps, the humanitarian shortfall, scale up predictable and flexible funding for humanitarian aid, and enforce compliance with international humanitarian law. In this context, we reaffirm our support for the integrated food security phase classification system. Second, early warning and prevention are pivotal. The role of the Security Council in the maintenance of international peace and security must begin with prevention through the range of diplomatic and political tools available to it. However, this should not limit the Security Council from employing innovative measures and new mechanisms to address conflict-induced hunger. Prevention should also encompass addressing the root causes of an armed conflict, including structural challenges. It must also be informed by comprehensive analyses and innovative approaches to bridging humanitarian and development finance, and by rethinking emergency response. Third and final, individual efforts from each member state can be the catalyst for positive change. Supporting local efforts, community-led initiatives, and context-specific responses is a starting point. Improving national reliance efforts, investing in climate-smart agriculture, agri-food system transformation, and involving women and youth, as we have heard before, have multiplier effects with high-impact outcomes. Member states must also work to implement and operationalize Security Council measures, which are critical to ensuring the protection of civilians and humanitarian workers, and in support of accountability mechanisms. Mr. President, Guyana remains committed to playing its part to address conflict-induced hunger and achieve food security. We have spent the last 2 years collaborating with fellow Council members to ensure that conflict-induced hunger remains a priority for the Security Council and the wider United Nations community. At home, our efforts to achieve food security for our citizens and CARICOM as a whole continue apace. We recognize that without food security, sustainable development will remain out of reach and peace can be threatened. We will continue our efforts and stand ready to share our knowledge and experience with the international community. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement. I now give the floor to Denmark, the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank the Deputy Secretary General and our briefers for their powerful interventions this morning. President Bio, thank you for your presence today and for your efforts in highlighting the deadly impact of conflict-induced hunger around the world. The briefings we have heard this morning are stark and irrefutable. Conflict continues to drive, exacerbate, and prolong hunger around the world. We see starvation used as a method of war. This is a violation of international humanitarian law, and it undermines the very foundation of our collective responsibility to protect civilians trapped in armed conflict. The international community is failing to realize the promise of zero hunger, and the Security Council is failing to realize the promise of Resolution 2417. Mr. President, allow me to make 3 points. First, the world this year has faced no less than 2 man-made and wholly preventable famines, as the representative from FAO has just described. In Sudan, both the RSF and the SAF have instrumentalized food aid as a tool of war, blocking deliveries, denying access, and manipulating assistance. 21 million people are facing acute food insecurity, all for the sake of political and military gain. In Gaza, severe restrictions on humanitarian aid have placed the entire population of Gaza at risk of a full-scale famine. It is therefore imperative that the UN and other humanitarian organizations are fully enabled to deliver life-saving humanitarian aid in accordance with the humanitarian principles and international humanitarian law. Second, Mr. President, the purposeful destruction of agricultural land and infrastructure essential for survival continues also to be deployed as a weapon. From the mining of fertile fields in Ukraine to the contamination of water sources and the targeting of irrigation systems in South Sudan, these acts inflict enduring harm long after the fighting ends. The loss of livestock, seed banks, and arable land deepens displacement and poverty and exacerbates climate vulnerability, reducing communities' ability to adapt to environmental shocks. Put simply, these deliberate acts are taking lives today and destroying futures for generations to come. Third, Mr. President, we know that hunger will not end with food aid alone. It demands political solutions to end violence, economic measures that sustain livelihoods, and environmental actions that protect the natural systems people depend upon. Within this Council, we must move from reacting to crises to preventing them by linking early warning to early action. And while we are not and should not become a humanitarian council, we bear a special responsibility to act when humanitarian access is willfully denied. In closing, Mr. President, around this table, we know that we have the tools to act. Resolution 2417 was a testament to the Council's resolve to end the scourge of conflict-induced hunger. But more than that, it was a collective call to action, a demand to uphold international humanitarian law, and a demand for accountability for those who violate it. We must now reaffirm our commitment to its full implementation. Denmark stands ready to work with all Council members to break this deadly cycle, to ensure that starvation, denial of aid, and the destruction of food systems are not met with silence, but with action. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Thank you, President. We would like to welcome His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. We're grateful to him for his very wise statement, and we completely endorse the content of that statement. We'd also like to thank the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed for her important intervention, as well as the Assistant Secretary General Joyce Masunya and the Special Envoy of the African Union, Dr. Ibrahim Asana Mayaki, as well as Mr. Maximo Torero, Head Economist of the FAO, for their valuable presentations. Recent figures indicate that over 280 million people confronted acute levels of food insecurity in 2024, with armed conflict the main factor in almost half of these cases. For the first time in over 2 decades, famine was declared simultaneously in 2 territories, Sudan and Gaza. This not only reflects the gravity of the situation, but also the inadequacy of the global response. Likewise, critical situations persist in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where a combination of hostilities, forced displacement, and restrictions on access of humanitarian assistance have deepened the vulnerability of millions of people. Panama is following very closely the situation in Haiti, where the the Artibonite region is confronting a very cruel reality. That region has been traditionally the breadbasket of the country. In that area, armed gangs have expanded their control over extensive rural areas, extorting the peasants, burning houses and fields, obstructing irrigation systems. And they have forced the abandonment of thousands of hectares of crops. It is essential for the parties to conflict ensure secure and unrestricted access of humanitarian assistance. And those states, particularly those involved in military operations, comply with their international obligations. The use of restrictions on food and water as a tactic of war, which is tragically reported in too many conflicts, is an unacceptable violation of the most basic norms of humanity. Of course, the special attention must be directed to the millions of children in regions such as South Sudan, Yemen, who are on the verge of famine, while others in Somalia, Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, Mali, and Myanmar are suffering the consequences of prolonged hunger. In this context, it is encouraging to observe the efforts to ensure the resiliency and sustainability of food systems that have tangible impacts on the lives of communities. Programs such as Homegrown School Meals of the School Meals Coalition demonstrate that purchasing food from small-scale farmers not only boosts rural economies, but also ensures nutritive food for millions of children, thus strengthening the social fabric. Panama endorses the African Union vision on the value of bolstering African food systems through the Kampala Declaration of the CAADP, which promotes sustainable production and inter-African trade. These integrated initiatives consolidate community cohesion, strengthen resilience in the face of crises, and contribute in a concrete way in preventing the recurrence of conflicts, thus demonstrating the close links between food security, sustainable development, and lasting peace. Mr. President, hunger is not an inevitable phenomenon. It is the result of unresolved conflicts, of climate change, of forced displacement, and too frequently, it is a result of the deliberate denial of food through human activity. Only through constructive dialogue, multilateral cooperation, and early action can we reduce the risks of conflict and move towards a world where food is guaranteed as a human right that it is, rather than a concession or a privilege, so that hunger stops being a threat to international peace and security. And with this in mind, we are happy to see the obvious consensus on many aspects that can be heard in the various statements of the colleagues who have preceded me that are participating in this very important debate. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, distinguished President of Sierra Leone, we're very pleased to see you here today presiding over our meeting. We would like to thank our today's briefers on a topic that leaves no one indifferent. There is consensus that conflicts go hand in hand with hunger. At the same time, the causation here for us is clear. It's not that hunger causes conflict, but rather the conflicts lead to the absence of food security. Hostilities destroy agriculture and trade, they cause mass displacement, and they deprive people of livelihoods. For centuries, humanity has failed to eliminate the nefarious practice of using hunger as a weapon of war, even though today that is a gross violation of IHL. We recall the hopes many countries and UN agencies placed on Security Council Resolution 2417 of 2018. Sadly, we have to acknowledge that those hopes were not fulfilled. On the contrary, the statistics from Gaza alone shocks the world on a daily basis. We disagree with singling hunger out as a cause of conflicts. Hunger can only exacerbate already existing crises, just like many other socioeconomic problems. The crises themselves come from political contradictions, religious and ethnic tensions. The most destructive factor is external interference in the sovereign affairs of states, and we have seen examples of that in the tragedies of Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Mr. President, we share concern about global hunger statistics throughout the world. The number of people facing acute food insecurity has risen from 112 million in 2018 to 295 million. And chronic undernourishment is something that afflicts 700 million people, and more than 2.3 billion still face inadequate nutrition. At the same time, according to FAO and WFP, wars are not the only cause of hunger. There are natural disasters such as droughts and floods, but also there are economic factors, but their origin is also something that must be properly understood. The UN estimates that enough food is being produced globally. The problem lies in its uneven distribution, where the West's excessive reserves are being accumulated by developing countries, first and foremost in Africa, due to past colonial and current neo-colonial practices, cannot switch the economy to achieve food sovereignty and remain vulnerable to market price fluctuations. And maintaining high prices on these is the concern of major U.S. and European agro-business producers. Their share of global trade in agricultural goods is about 75%. Unfortunately, there is no UN analysis of these global threats to food security. It also took a long time for the truth about how Western states rushed to save their economy during the COVID-19 pandemic emerged without regard for the impact of their reckless financial, economic, and other actions on vulnerable trade partners. The plan was to sweep this under the carpet by conducting a massive propaganda campaign blaming Russia for provoking a global crisis. But gradually the smoke cleared, and we see a very educational story here on the Istanbul Agreement. It showed the commercial nature of the Black Sea Initiative, commercially beneficial to the Western states, which initially was presented as a humanitarian effort to help the country. And more than that, despite the Secretary General's efforts, Western capitals failed to honor their claims that unilateral sanctions would not affect Russian agricultural exports. Unfortunately, it took over 3 years for the UN and its leadership to find the strength to acknowledge the real impact of illegal sanctions based on the UN sources on the ground. For example, the Secretary General's recent report A8415 to the Second Committee of the GA states that unilateral coercive measures worsen socioeconomic conditions in developing countries, that they disrupt humanitarian aid, and they cause food shortages. Of course, these assessments were sorely missing when we discussed illegal sanctions on the breadbasket of the Middle East to Syria or Cuba's long-standing blockade. Additionally, the discussion about illegal sanctions against Russia, one of the world's largest agricultural powers, also is seeing new developments. For example, the flagship reports by FAO, WFP, and IFAD show that the anti-Russian sanctions disrupted global grain supplies, that they drove up fertilizer prices and the shortages of fertilizers, that they increased transport insurance costs, and thus worsened global food security. It is being proven that attempts to blame Russia for rising prices and food shortages are unfounded. By the way, it was not surprising that this report, with a fairly objective assessment, provoked outbursts of hysteria from some Western delegations who demanded an internal investigation. We would like to state here that this kind of pressure on UN bodies is unacceptable. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to say that hunger must be addressed comprehensively. And in this context, what becomes increasingly important is the socio-economic entities of the UN. Humanitarian aid is a temporary measure. The key is strengthening countries' own ability to feed their populations. And this requires international cooperation, solidarity, and the rejection of politicization, unfair competition, and illegal unilateral restrictions. Russian raw materials and food are in demand in 160 countries all over the world. We aim to build reliable, long-term, and equal partnerships and consistently support technological and economic sovereignty as a foundation for political stability. Despite all Western obstacles that are being created, we assist developing countries through various channels, bilaterally and through international organizations, including the UN World Food Programme. Through WFP alone, between 2021 and 2025, Russia provided assistance to Afghanistan, Niger, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Syria, Palestine, Cuba, Yemen, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and other countries to the amount of over 250 million. We helped and will continue to help those in need worldwide. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of China.
Distinguished His Excellency President Bill, I would like to welcome you in presiding over today's meeting in New York, and I thank DSG Amina, ASG Musuya, Mr. Torero, and the Special Envoy Mayakite for their briefings. Food security bears on human survival and is vital to national economies, people's livelihoods, and security. Currently, global food insecurity is aggravating, with 295 million people facing acute hunger, 60% of whom live in conflict-affected areas. The Security Council has always been closely following the issue of conflict and food security and has, through Resolution 2417, set forth a series of clear requirements. The international community should build consensus and form synergy to jointly safeguard global food security and protect people from the threat of hunger. I would like to make 4 points. First, we must uphold political solutions to break the vicious cycle of conflict and hunger. Armed conflict is a major cause of humanitarian crises and hunger. War claims innocent lives, causes widespread displacement, and disrupts agricultural production and economic activities. We call on all parties to the conflict to resolve disputes through dialogue and consultation, bring an early end to hostilities, and restore peace and security. All countries should uphold a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable approach to security, jointly building a balanced, effective, and sustainable security architecture. The Security Council bears the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security and should actively fulfill its duties to promote political solutions to hotspot issues. Second, upholding international rule of law and safeguarding civilians' basic rights to survival. In conflict zones, humanitarian aid is the primary and often the only lifeline for civilians, with organizations like the UN maintaining the last resort for survival. Regrettably, humanitarian operations are frequently obstructed. The violations of international humanitarian law are constant occurrence. Humanitarian assistance must not be politicized. Hunger must not be weaponized, and humanitarian workers must not become targets of attack. Compliance with international humanitarian law is an obligation for all parties that all parties must fulfill. It is not an option. We call on Israel to strictly comply with international humanitarian law and ensure large-scale entry of humanitarian supplies into Gaza. The humanitarian situation in Sudan is extremely dire. The Rapid Support Forces must immediately lift restrictions on humanitarian access in Al Fashir to ensure safe entry and distribution of supplies. Third, we must promote sustainable development to tackle the root causes of conflicts and food insecurity. Inclusive and sustainable development is a vital foundation for lasting peace and a fundamental guarantee for protecting people from hunger. The international community should increase support for developing countries, enhancing their capacity for development and governance to achieve lasting stability. We must resolutely oppose unilateralism and protectionist measures such as the abuse of tariffs and the erection of fences and barriers, creating a fair and favorable international environment for developing countries to access global markets and share the dividends of emerging industries. For some time now, a certain developed country has been reluctant to fulfill its commitment on development financing, even cutting off funding to international development agencies and openly opposing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which has dealt a severe blow to development efforts of the world. We call on all parties to uphold genuine multilateralism, an international development environment, accelerate efforts to bridge the North-South development divide and achieve shared development. Fourth, improving global food and agriculture governance to safeguard shared global food security. The international food and agriculture market has long been plagued by issues such as monopolistic pricing power of major grain traders, excessive financialization of agricultural products, structural imbalances in production and supply chains, and inadequate representation of developing countries. Chinese President Xi Jinping's Global Governance Initiative offers a Chinese solution to a more just and equitable global governance system, providing important guidance for improving global food and agriculture governance. The international community should unite and collaborate to enhance the representation, voice, and decision-making power of developing countries. It must eliminate unreasonable restrictions on food production and exports, combat speculative capital and price monopolies, build a production and supply chain with security, stability, mutual benefit, and win-win, and establish a more fair and equitable international food trade order. President, China attaches great importance to food security. We are committed to feeding our population of over 1.4 billion people through our own efforts, while providing assistance within our capabilities to countries in need, thereby contributing China's strength to global food security. China will continue to support the UN in playing a vital role in international food and agriculture and remains committed to improving global food security through international cooperation, making greater contributions to eradicating hunger and safeguarding food security. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Sierra Leone for convening this timely debate, and we welcome your presence, Mr. President, to chair this meeting, and we appreciate your important and invaluable statement. We also appreciate the briefers, DSG Amina Mohammed, ASG Joyce Masuya, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki, and Mr. Torero for their important insights into the hunger conflict nexus and ways to address it. The global environment today demonstrates a dangerous two-way dynamic. Conflicts, including foreign occupation, are driving hunger on a massive scale, while hunger and economic desperation are in turn aggravating fragility and heightening the risk of renewed or protracted conflict. According to the 2025 Global Report on Food Crises, more than 294 million people in 53 countries face acute food insecurity. In 14 of the 16 most severe hotspots, conflict remains the primary driver. Mr. President, it is a matter of great concern that starvation and collective punishment have often been used as tools to advance military or political objectives in stark violation of international humanitarian law and UN Security Council Resolution 2417. Nowhere was this more visible than in Gaza, where the latest assessments indicate that 100% of the population faced high levels of acute food insecurity, with a significant proportion already in the most severe catastrophic phase, marked by starvation, destitution, and death. The ongoing peace process offers a measure of hope, but it will take years to reverse the devastation of the past 2 years. It is therefore imperative that the ceasefire is fully respected and implemented, that humanitarian access remains unhindered, and that urgent efforts begin towards reconstruction and rehabilitation. Patterns of devastation are also evident in Yemen, Sudan, South Sudan, DRC, Haiti, and other protected conflict areas, including occupied territories where livelihoods have collapsed and millions are now dependent on humanitarian assistance for survival. President, we believe that food insecurity in conflict zones must be addressed through a comprehensive and principled approach. First, the universal and consistent application of UN Charter principles, Security Council resolutions, and international law in all conflict situations is imperative. It is the persistence of double standards and political expediency that often enables continued violations. Second, humanitarian assistance must never be subjected to political conditions. All parties must comply with international humanitarian law, fully comply with ceasefires, allow safe and unimpeded aid delivery, and protect humanitarian personnel. Accountability for deliberate obstruction or delays is a must. Third, we must also address the systemic causes of poverty and hunger, eliminate rural poverty, and protect our food systems, which are the main source of livelihoods for nearly 4.5 billion people. We must enlarge food production, moderate food prices, and reform unequal agricultural trade. Climate-induced disasters, including recurrent floods and droughts, continue to erode food security. We must scale up support for adaptation and resilience. It requires not sympathy, but solidarity and genuine partnership, as emphasized by you, Mr. President, with particular reference to Africa. Fourth, the response must be comprehensive. A whole-of-system approach is required to break the cycle, from prevention and early warning systems to conflict resolution to long-term peace building. The scramble for natural resources must end. Political solutions must be prioritized, hence the importance of pacific settlement of disputes reaffirmed by this Council in Resolution 2788 in July. Mr. President, the Security Council has a vital role in ensuring that conflict does not deprive civilians of their fundamental right to food, and to also ensure advance measures that prevent weaponization of hunger, safeguard humanitarian access, and strengthen the resilience of communities affected by conflict. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Your Excellency, President Bio, we thank Sierra Leone for convening this timely debate as the WFP warns for the first time in recent history, the world is facing two concurrent famines in Sudan and in Gaza. Hence, the clear-eyed analysis of the briefings we heard this morning come at a critical juncture. The 2025 Global Report on Food Crisis and the FAO WFP Hunger Spots 25-26 Outlook leave no doubt. Conflict remains the principal driver of acute hunger. According to the Hunger Hotspots report, acute food insecurity is likely to worsen across 16 countries and territories, among them Sudan, Palestine, South Sudan, Haiti, and Mali remain hotspots of highest concern, while Yemen has now been elevated to the same category. The stark reality is a moral alarm bell that just jolted the international community into unified action. Across this context, armed violence destroys harvests, blocks markets, and displaces millions, severing livelihoods and eroding resilience. The figures are staggering. In Sudan, 24.6 million people are projected to face crisis or worse levels of food insecurity. In Gaza, despite the partial resumption of humanitarian assistance since mid-October, 1/3 of the population is expected to face famine, the highest IPC faced. In South Sudan, 57% of the population faces high levels of acute food insecurity. In Haiti, by June 2026, 5.9 million people, over half the population, is projected to face crisis and will struggle to survive. These are not statistics. They are lives, families, women, and children caught in the crossfire of conflict and deprivation. In this respect, I want to highlight the following. First, conflict multiplies vulnerability. Reports show that armed conflict and violence remain the primary driver of acute food insecurity. In 14 out of 16 hotspots, armed violence is the dominant cause of hunger. Food insecurity today is not inventable. It is mostly man-made. This also means it is almost always foreseeable and preventable. Second, the surge in hunger is occurring amid shrinking humanitarian resources. Only 36% of the required funding for food security has been received by October 2025. At the same time, official development assistance is projected to decline by 13% this year. This erosion of support has devastating effects. Food assistance is rationed, nutrition programs are cut, and pathways from relief to recovery collapse. Predictable financing, particularly through multilateral mechanisms, is essential to sustain operations and rebuild livelihoods. Third, addressing conflict-related food insecurity requires coherent political, humanitarian, and development action. United Nations Security Council Resolution 2417 reminds us that the deliberate starvation of civilians is prohibited. Yet, such violations persist. The Council must ensure that Resolution 2417 is translated into consistent practice, demanding respect for humanitarian law, unhindered humanitarian access to all civilians, and holding accountable those who weaponize hunger. In the context of accessibility, I would like to underscore the indispensable role of maritime security in safeguarding global food supply chains. Nearly 90% of traded food commodities move by sea. Disruptions to maritime routes due to conflict directly jeopardize the availability and affordability of food worldwide. Fourth, we must recognize that food security is national security. Where people cannot feed their families, despair fuels displacement, instability, and conflict. When food systems collapse, so do economies, institutions, and social cohesion. Investing in food security is therefore an investment in peace. No nation can be secure when its people are hungry. Mr. President, on this occasion, we reaffirm our steadfast commitment to global food security. Greece is party to the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty since 2024 and was among the early signatories of the 2023 joint communiqué condemning the use of food as a weapon of war. Translating commitment into action, Greece proudly participates in the Grain from Ukraine initiative under WFP. Further, in solidarity with civilians, Greece airdropped 8.5 tons of food supplies in Gaza earlier this year, while also being a contributing donor to WFP's operations in Sudan. The human cost of inaction is measured in lives lost, in children irreversibly malnourished, and in communities robbed of hope. The hunger hotspots and global report on food crisis are not records of despair. They are calls to coordinated, decisive action. Preventing famine and ending the weaponization of hunger are not only moral imperatives, they are political responsibilities. Greece stands ready to work with all partners to ensure that conflict no longer consigns millions to hunger. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. I welcome your participation, Excellency Dr. Julius Maada, President of the Republic, and commend Sierra Leone for convening this timely open debate. We also thank the Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Amina Mohammed, the Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Joyce Msuya, the African Union Special Envoy, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Miyaki, and Mr. Maximo Torero Kulen for their thoughtful briefing. Although the Security Council adopted Resolution 2417 in 2018, resolution which identifies the link between armed conflict and hunger, resolution which condemns the use of starvation as a method of warfare. Acute food insecurity continues to escalate. The 2025 Global Report on Food Crisis demonstrates that conflicts remains the primary drivers of the most severe crisis. Nowhere is this starker than in Sudan, than in Gaza. In Gaza and Sudan, siege tactics, restrictions on food, clean water, fuel and electricity, and repeated strikes on essential infrastructures have amounted to the use of starvation as a weapon of war. The impact on civilians, especially children, has been profound, with long-term consequences that cannot be reversed. The link between hunger and conflict feeds a vicious circle, a vicious cycle. Breaking this cycle is essential if the Council is to uphold its responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, allow me to highlight 3 priority areas. First, starvation. Starvation can never be justified as a tool of war. Parties to conflict must protect civilians and the system crucial to their survival, including food production and water infrastructure, and must allow unimpeded humanitarian access to the needy population. Algeria is actively engaged in this agenda, co-chairing the working group on the protection of civilian infrastructure within the global initiative to galvanize political commitment to the international humanitarian law. Our commitment to humanitarian personnel was reaffirmed when we signed 2 months ago the Declaration on their protection in September 2025. Second, sustainable political solutions are indispensable. Many countries, economic shocks, climate extremes, inflation, displacement. Algeria support socio-economic development as a foundation for stability through its cooperation agency, which finances projects across Africa in partnership with UNICEF and UNDP. Third, President, the Council should advance concrete measures, including creating early warning mechanism for violations against food, energy, and water systems, mobilizing financial resources to rapidly restore essential services in conflict setting, guaranteeing safe, rapid, and unhindering humanitarian access, ensuring accountability for attacks on civilian infrastructure, and finally, establishing a dedicated sanction regime targeting parties that violate Resolution 2417 and commit international humanitarian law breaches such as starvation as a weapon of warfare. Mr. President, food insecurity can arise from many factors, but when it is driven or exacerbated by armed conflict, the international community, the Security Council, has a duty to respond swiftly and decisively. Algeria remains fully committed to working with all partners to protect civilians, to uphold international humanitarian law, and to promote just and lasting peace in the world. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea commends Sierra Leone for convening this timely debate on the presence of His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. I also thank the Deputy Secretary General Mohammed, ASG Musia, Special Envoy Mayaki, and Mr. Torero for their insights. Mr. President, the relationship between conflict and food insecurity is interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Helping communities in need requires integrated and holistic approaches that address both immediate requirements and structural causes. In this regard, the Republic of Korea underscores the following 3 priorities where the international community must take more decisive action. First, ensuring unimpeded humanitarian access and responding to urgent needs. Time and again, we have seen a disturbing pattern of the deliberate obstruction of aid. Notably, humanitarian access has been used as a weapon of war, aid convoys denied, warehouses looted, and relief workers targeted, leaving millions trapped in certain areas declared by the UN as in famine. Recalling Resolution 2417, my delegation urges all parties to conflict to respect their obligation under international humanitarian law, facilitate rapid and unhindered humanitarian access at scale. At the same time, the Council and the international community must support more active, responsive approaches, including cash-based transfer and flexible funding to reach those most in need. We can't allow crises like Yemen become the norm, where funding shortfalls have left more than 70 million people facing acute hunger. In particular, the Republic of Korea is implementing REACH initiative, responding with emergency assistance for conflict-affected households in partnership with World Food Program in countries such as Myanmar, Syria, Palestine, and Sudan to alleviate humanitarian crisis. This partnership is also expected to contribute to enhancing food security in those countries by providing emergency food and nutrition support. Second, enhancing coordination between the Security Council and other UN mechanisms in addressing food insecurity. In this Sahel region, we witnessed how compounding effects of conflict, climate shocks, and displacement create catastrophic conditions where extremism and terrorism can thrive. Tackling these interconnected challenges demands integrated strategies that bridge the humanitarian development peace nexus. In this context, the Peacebuilding Commission is uniquely positioned to play a catalytic role by convening a broad range of stakeholders. We propose that the PBC organize thematic sessions focused on specific countries or regions facing conflict-related food insecurity, such as Sahel, assembling relevant UN entities, regional organizations, and international financial institutions. Lastly, but not least, strengthening food system resilience. Resilient agri-food system can withstand shocks, reduce communities' vulnerability to manipulation, and prevent local disruptions from cascading into broader instability. This is why building sustainable food system must remain a core concern of this Council and the wider UN membership. In this vein, my delegation welcomes the 2025 Kampala CAADP Declaration, an ambitious roadmap for transforming Africa's agri-food system. In the same guiding spirit, the Republic of Korea proudly supports African countries in localizing and improving rice production by sharing high-yield rice varieties and agricultural technology. Mr. President, in closing, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its unwavering commitment to combating the scourge of food insecurity in communities where they matter most. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I welcome Your Excellency, President Bio, to the Council, and I thank Sierra Leone for convening this important debate. I also thank DSG Mohammed, ASG Masuya, Dr. Mayaki, and Mr. Torero for their frank and sobering briefings. Colleagues, Famine in the 21st century is not a natural disaster. It is a man-made tragedy. The evidence is clear. Nearly 300 million people face acute food insecurity, most in countries affected by conflict. Across Sudan, Gaza, the Sahel, Yemen, and Myanmar, conflict has devastated harvests, shattered supply chains, and uprooted families from the land they depend on. I'll make 3 points. First, the Security Council has a responsibility to address conflict, to prevent escalation, and to support efforts towards inclusive and sustainable peace. We have the tools. Resolutions 2417 and 2573 are unequivocal. Starvation as a weapon of war and attacks on civilian infrastructure are unacceptable. We urge all member states to strengthen monitoring, reporting, and accountability for violations, and to uphold their obligations under these resolutions. Second, international humanitarian law must be upheld. The United Kingdom calls on all parties to conflict to comply fully with international humanitarian law and allow rapid, unimpeded humanitarian access. When aid is blocked or delayed, it is the most vulnerable who suffer first. Families are cut off from food, and children face acute malnutrition. In April, the UK launched the Conflict, Hunger and International Humanitarian Law Handbook, offering practical guidance to minimise food insecurity during conflict. Third, we must act to prevent hunger wherever it occurs. Conflict breeds hunger, but hunger can also fuel instability and further conflict. The UK's Resilience and Adaptation Fund, alongside our humanitarian financing, is supporting longer-term solutions in fragile and conflict-affected states. Building local systems that protect people, markets, and livelihoods in the face of climatic and other shocks. We are investing in climate-resilient agriculture, supporting local food systems, and championing the participation of women and youth in building resilient communities. The UK remains committed to supporting food security and tackling conflict-driven hunger. We are the largest bilateral donor to the Food and Agriculture Organization, and this year alone contributed over $540 million to the World Food Programme for critical interventions, including in Palestine and Sudan. President, the UK will continue to press for sustained humanitarian access and invest in resilience so that conflict does not condemn communities to hunger. We all must use the tools at our disposal to break this cycle. I thank you.